Hello. We're going to be talking about gold and Bitcoin today. Um, this is the gold spot price. Gold is more or less at all-time high. It's had a tiny, tiny pullback in the last day. Um, and even the last few days, it looks like, it pulled back a little bit. It was at 4,480. Now it's at 4,424. Uh, so a slight pullback. But what's interesting is gold. Why is gold important? Well, let's look at this. Is gold a risk asset, right? Okay, when we ask Google, what is gold a risk asset? It says gold is generally not considered a risk asset. It's primarily known as a safe haven asset. So, as you can see from the all-time chart, let's go to the all-time. This is gold, and then we're looking at the all-time chart on gold. Look at this. Around this range, there's a little bit of flatness from an all-time point of view, macro point of view. So July, roughly, it looks like we hit kind of a low, and then we went from basically 16. Actually, let's see, 16. Just trying to get it exactly. Anyway, around 1600 to 4426. So if you'd invested around there, that would have been great. I've never bought gold, and I really don't have any interest in gold. But obviously, people who invested at that time, they're up a lot. So anyway, we've been in quantitative tightening for the last few years. Therefore, it's been more of a risk-off environment. Now, um, interesting, you look at Bitcoin, and let's look at the 5 year on Bitcoin. Now, as I said, around this range, uh, around July of 2022, roughly, um, it spiked up as we were in a more risk-off environment. So let's go to July of 2022, or just any of this range, around that range of 2022. It's looking like we kind of bottomed out around November of 2022. So it's a little slightly different from Bitcoin. However, ever since then, Bitcoin has skyrocketed a lot, even though it's had pullbacks more significant, like maybe possibly more significant pullbacks than gold. It's still skyrocketed a lot. Therefore, you have to wonder if Bitcoin is considered no longer a risk on asset, because people, I think, are dumping money into Bitcoin as a safe haven asset because, as you know, institutions are buying, et cetera, et cetera. The funny thing about this whole thing is gold and Bitcoin are completely useless. I mean, like, Bitcoin does nothing in the real world, and neither does gold. They're both completely useless assets. And that's the funny thing about this whole thing. Gold cannot be used to do anything. Gold cannot, build a house for you. You can't eat gold. You can't build a car with gold. You can't build copper, you can't build wiring with gold. People use copper for wiring. They don't use gold. So it's funny that these assets both don't really have any utility. Like, what does Bitcoin actually do? Nothing. Doesn't really help us do anything. Yet look at the values of both of them. Or it's basically, gold especially is at all-time high. Bitcoin's had little dips, so we're not quite at the all-time high, but still, ever since we've been doing quantitative tightening and we've been in a more risk-on or risk-off environment, both of them have done extremely well, extremely well. So now the question becomes, when we enter QE, as we're entering QE, um, is this trend going to reverse? Now, obviously, I can't tell you yes or no, and I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. Nothing in my videos is financial advice. If you want to speak to a financial advisor, go to your bank. Anyway, so back to this. The question becomes, as we're starting QE, or stealth QE as they call it, is this going to change? Is this trend going to reverse? Is gold going to flatten out? Is it going to dip? I mean, look at some of these dips on gold. Like up here, it was at around 1700 and it dipped all the way down to 1100, 1180, 34. 1134. So, I mean, that's a significant dip on gold because gold is a massive asset. Right now, um, gold is, I think, a $31 trillion asset. So, if if gold either goes flat or it goes down, that could be good for risk on assets. If we're entering a more risk on environment and gold goes flat or even dips, where where's that money going to go? Especially if it dips. Like if gold were to dip, let's say a little bit, I mean, you're talking about $31 trillion asset. Where's that money going to go? If some of that money enters, maybe some of it will enter Bitcoin, but maybe a chunk of it will enter altcoins because, as I said, Bitcoin is considered more a safe haven asset. So if we're in a risk on environment, it may not be going up as much as people think. It may keep going up because obviously Bitcoin kind of runs the market anyway. And we're not at all time high in Bitcoin. We are at all time high in gold, you know. So that's the difference. So let's say Bitcoin goes up to $130,000, right? If we're entering quantitative easing and we're entering more risk on environment, alts could outperform both of these. Alts could maybe outperform gold and Bitcoin. The reason being because they may not perform quite as well because we're more risk on. Obviously, it depends on the altcoin because you could invest in an altcoin and it could just go to zero. Overall, people who've invested in gold, especially early, they're way up on their investment. So overall, the trend for gold seems up over time, over years and years and years. Um, you know, and the same for Bitcoin. The interesting thing about gold and Bitcoin is gold is a commodity that basically doesn't move. It has no life. It's basically dead, right? Um, it's just a piece of object, basically, right? Um, and or it is an object. However, Bitcoin is a digital asset. If Bitcoin were to get hacked, if someone hacks Bitcoin, um, you know, then what would that do to the price of Bitcoin? Or if someone hacks a massive reserve of Bitcoin and sells, what is that going to do to the price of Bitcoin? Especially if governments are investing in Bitcoin and they're storing Bitcoin in their digital, reserve. I mean, that would be crazy, of course. So Bitcoin is more, I think that's maybe the reason why Bitcoin is still going to be more volatile than gold because gold is just, gold is gold. It doesn't move. It doesn't change. Bitcoin changes, and is subject to, you know, quantum computing. Who knows? We don't know what's going to happen in the future. And Bitcoin, you know, is just way more susceptible, I think, than gold. I wouldn't say way more, but it's more susceptible than gold. Therefore, I don't know. I'm not going to invest in probably either, unless the price of you know one of these were to go down maybe massively, because I don't want to be buying it more or less all time highs. Again, as I said, Bitcoin's not at all time high, but it's just gone up so much from what it was that it to me that these don't make any sense. That's why I have my money in alts. And if we enter more risk on, my hope is I can make money on alts, and we'll see what happens. I'll keep you posted on this. And I hope you guys have a good day. Again, not financial advice. And take care. Bye.